Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, with some concluding thoughts for you on the collapse of communism across Eastern Europe and in the Soviet Union itself. How do we explain this collapse and, as its consequence, the end of the Cold War? You'll need to go back to the inherent flaws in the ideology of communism itself, and all ideologies have flaws. What comes to my mind straight away is the lack of incentive, the lack of competitiveness to make your product the best. Flaws that could perhaps have been overcome, but weren't. But also, the Soviet economy just didn't produce enough goods. There wasn't enough food. A consumer economy just didn't develop. And what was produced was often of poor quality. Back to those incentives. And with such a weak economy, social services, healthcare and education weren't adequately funded. Then there is the communist system itself, which was authoritarian in the extreme, cowering the population rather than winning their support. And there was America's policy of containment that not only competed with the Soviet Union for markets, but forced them into spending more than they could afford on its military. Though in truth, America couldn't afford it either. There's an awful lot of poverty in America. So there are a lot of long-term, or as I prefer to look at it, fundamental factors to consider. And while I'm sure you know 3 of the 4 people on this slide, if you're unsure of the guy second in line, well, it's Friedrich Engels, old Karl's mate. Then we have more immediate factors, or triggers. Solidarity, the war in Afghanistan, and the impact of Gorbachev and his policies. Solidarity stood up to the Soviet-backed communist government in Poland, and won. First, it undermined communist authority in Poland. Supporting solidarity was simply the best way that Polish people could show that they did not accept the leadership of the Communist Party. And of course, solidarity eventually took over. But the impact on the rest of the Soviet Bloc was considerable too. Here was a shining example of what could be achieved. Afghanistan was also a key factor. Afghanistan became the Soviet Union's Vietnam, an unwinnable war. It not only drained Soviet resources, but its political will too. Gorbachev certainly wanted rid of the burden. And so we come to the final trigger, Gorby and his policies. Perestroika, or restructuring, opened the Soviet Union to market forces, which led some people to lose their jobs, and it led to goods becoming too expensive for people to buy. That's market forces. And in cutting government spending on the military, he upset his generals. Whilst glasnost, or openness, opened his government up to criticism that the entrenched old guard in the Communist Party couldn't bear. And in trying to reform the Soviet Union, the signal it sent to the peoples of Eastern Europe was that their governments had to change too. And Gorby made it clear that he was not going to help prop them up, as had been done in the past. And then Gorbachev lost control of things. Now, in my ebook on Eastern Europe, The Collapse of the Soviet Union and so the End of the Cold War, I end with an afterthought. So let me give a summary of what I include in my book, because it gives a sense of the scale of the collapse. More than a dozen historical states seized their opportunity and broke away from Russia, with the most important being Ukraine. Ukraine suddenly possessed the world's third largest nuclear arsenal, but a trilateral agreement between Ukraine, the Russian Federation, and America, with America promising Ukraine protection if it returned the missiles for decommissioning, saw the matter resolved. Kazakhstan had the world's fourth largest nuclear arsenal, which it also returned to the Russian Federation. Belarus returned all its nuclear warheads to the Russian Federation too. The states that were reconstituted into the Russian Federation would enjoy a considerable degree of autonomy. There were some struggles for independence, however. Chechnya, for example, and the Russian Federation, of course, has also forcibly reclaimed territory in Ukraine and Georgia. Elsewhere, countries have reunited, East and West Germany, as we have seen in 1990, and countries have amicably redivided, the Czech Republic and Slovakia in 1993. Some countries from the former Soviet Bloc are now members of the European Union, whilst a long list of former communist countries are now members of NATO. In the wider world, the Korean peninsula remains divided, and, with North Korea now a nuclear power, a cause of continued concern. Vietnam, though still communist, is reintegrated into the world. Its factories are part of the global economy, and tourists flock to Vietnam. It's a beautiful country. Whilst the West's forces became bogged down in Afghanistan, fighting much the same Islamic forces as the Soviet Union had. The Cold War is over then, or is it? Whether the world is a safer place, a more settled place, is also in doubt. And as for Francis Fukuyama's claim that history had ended with the end of the Cold War, Fukuyama is an American political scientist. Well, though he is a very clever man, I have to disagree. History is not over. The history of ideas is not over. The history of communism is not even over. In 100 years' time, there will be exams on 21st century history, and they will include ideological battles. But you won't need to worry about them. So as always, thank you so much for listening. And as always, let me wish you the best of luck with your studies. Cheers.